What does it mean to grieve? It's a question I've struggled with over the course of my near 23 years long orbit around the sun. I've been fortunate in my life to require this complex form of self expression on only a handful of occasions, and yet, every time they inevitably surface, I find myself inadequately equipped to parse the multitude of factors that make up the process. There's the performance component. As a man in a pseudo-chauvinistic society, you are expected to walk the fine line between an outpouring of anguish to satisfactorily display your sorrow while simultaneously manifesting a stoic facade for your more vulnerable peers to draw strength from. There is the need for reflection. Sifting through the entire history of an interpersonal relationship, a web of complicated emotions made all the hazier by the fresh wound cleaving them down the middle. Your memories bloom all at once in a cascade of both good and bad moments, the colors running together until you're left with a Polaroid picture that appears to have been developed improperly. And yet the way, at least in Western society, that we execute the grieving process condenses all of these things into a minuscule window of time in the grand scheme, when the contusions have yet to darken into the rolling purples and dull yellows of a bruise, the gashes on your psyche still dripping blood on your finest attire. Maybe that's why morning clothes are black. After all, the stains would be a dead giveaway that your stiff upper lip is a mirage. I believe it's these difficult experiences in my own life that finds me drawn to music that has been made as an expression of grief. So often, songs are written as an outlet for catharsis, a medium for expression whose style of performance leads to an inherent personal quality, much more so than most other forms of media. A film requires a team of collaborators to execute on the artistic vision. A novelist usually works alone, but is inherently detached from the medium of the written word, as is the poet. A musician is uniquely equipped to use their art form as catharsis not only for themselves, but also to make their music a platform for their audience to channel their own cathartic needs into, and to ascribe personal meanings to songs and lyrics regardless of original authorial intent. Mount Erie's A Crow Looked at Me is cited by many in critical circles as being one of the most visceral and human depictions of grief ever put to music. Chronicling the life, illness, and premature death of his wife from pancreatic cancer less than 2 years after the birth of their first child, songwriter Phil Elvirum creates a sonic atmosphere devoid of excess. The production is low fidelity, evoking the sounds of hearing someone perform through an open window as you pass by on the street, as if you were unconsciously intruding onto a private performance. The instrumentation is sparse and carefully arranged. Every element has its place in the composition, and each serves a different purpose. All of this is in service of the lyrics, however. Elvirum's writing has stripped itself of metaphor and artifice, leaving bare the skeletal structure of a man being crushed under the weight of an unfathomable tragedy. He uses the space he's created for himself in the form of these songs as a place to meditate on the events that led to this moment. On Ravens, he describes what the days leading up to his wife's passing were like, knowing that the outcome was inevitable and being reminded anytime he looked in her direction.
You were probably inside. You were probably aching, wanting not to die. Your body transformed. I couldn't bear to look, so I turned my head west like an early death.
It's a harrowing moment, a man being forced to grieve his wife while she was still living, the process of which making it impossible to be the strength she needed in her final days, further compounding the guilt and anguish as he searches for scraps of life in old pictures. The sparse accompaniment stings like a cold breeze in autumn, not unlike the weather he describes in the song's opening verse. In press leading up to the album's release, Elvirum was quick to point out the abrasive nature of the compositions, labeling them as, quote, barely music, which may feel like an inherently dismissive sentiment to agree with, but I think he's onto something here. It's the lack of innate musical quality that makes the songs all the more jarring and effective as expressions of the flayed corners of Elvirum's psyche laid bare, a songwriter so damaged and distracted that his songs revert back to their most primitive forms. Not every record drawing from grief requires such a minimal, raw approach to exercise the catharsis. Often, artists will marry harsh, dissonant, or aggressive instrumentation to expressions of grief to create a sonic palette evocative of the bitter anger one can feel at the cruelness of the cycle of life and the way it often takes those we love from us in undue time. Post-hardcore band Touche Amore creates perhaps the most definitive example of this concept with their 2016 album Stage 4. Written in the aftermath of vocalist Jeremy Bohm's losing his mother to late-stage cancer 2 years prior, Stage 4 explored many of the same themes and situational agony as A Crow Looked at Me, but while the latter's minimalist approach evokes the crushing emptiness of grieving quietly and alone, Bohm's introspective treatises on mortality and mourning read like the wailing lamentations of an angry soul lost in a world whose unfairness has moved him first to tears and eventually to war. War against the guilt in his heart over his failings while his mother was sick, against the pride that prevents him from showing just how much the whole experience was killing him inside, but most of all, against the implicit unfairness of it all. Flowers and You, the album's opener, serves as the thesis statement that drives the following 12 tracks. Its 3 verses are a perfect distillation of all the complex and soul-crushing aspects of the grieving process referenced in the intro, performed in the desperate cadence of a man who needs someone, anyone, to hear him, if only for a moment. Let's switch gears a little bit. Music about grief doesn't always come in the form of highbrow, critically acclaimed masterworks like our previous 2 examples. Emo revival standout Hot Mulligan released their second full-length record, You'll Be Fine, in the spring of 2020 during the early days of the coronavirus pandemic. The group's previous efforts could best be characterized, as much of the genre can, as juvenile and adolescent in substance, choosing to focus largely on relationship drama and smoking weed with friends for lyrical inspiration. The very first verse on this new record would dispel any notion that this trend would continue. In spite of its nonsense title, OG Buellsky is a devastating meditation on what it's like to lose a friend after falling out of their life for a time. Lead singer Nathan Sandville paints a vibrant picture of an adolescent friendship, much like the ones he would describe in passing on earlier records, hinting that the passage of time has not treated these youthful excursions well before bringing a sledgehammer crashing down in the form of the chorus, which reads,
the pictures we had left a few years ago. I bet the funeral I was at and back at home.
In a way, the chorus serves a dual purpose. As catharsis, obviously, but also as a rebuke/recontextualization of their previous material. Once you've heard the chorus of OG Buellsky, returning to the old songs written about the friendships that he has now clearly aged out of doesn't fill you with the same carefree joy they may have previously. Rather, you want to reach through the screen and tell them to enjoy what they have while they've got it. The passage of time robs us of many things. A line from Flowers and You comes to mind. Grieving is, at its core, a process of reflection. Mourning a death in the family requires the examination often of a whole lifetime's worth of memories and emotions. The death of a friend can often be even more fraught. Friendships, by and large, have an inherent sense of temporariness to them. It's possible to imagine living without them, because you've already done so before. This introduces a completely new and different layer of guilt into the process. The Hotel Year's Home Like No Place Is There is a voyage plagued by depression, anxiety, and songwriter Christian Holden's anarchist worldview. Your Deep Rest is the song many remember from the record's track list, its catchy chorus and number of memorable lines making it stick out against some of the record's more jagged, harder to digest material, which is ironic given its morose and heavy subject matter. Dealing with the suicide of a friend, the lead-up, and the aftermath, Holden finds himself in a unique position in the examples we've examined so far. Where the previous tracks have seen the narrators oscillate between sorrow and rage, Holden works his way through both before finally settling on something else. Acceptance. The final line of the song is, after all,
Thanks.
After wrestling with his emotions, denial at his friend's behavior before his passing, and struggling with the guilt of having missed the funeral because of his own struggles with the feeling that he could have done more, Holden comes to the conclusion that, perhaps, in some twisted way, this was the only way for their friend to set themselves free of the day-to-day hell they were living. The cycle is unfair. It's hollow comfort, but it may just be enough to begin the healing process from such a deep wound. Grief is not inextricably linked to death. A phrase I heard recently that drastically changed my worldview reads as follows. Quote, "The worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you." So often in our modern, interconnected world, there is a pressure to acknowledge that other people have it worse. There will always be someone suffering worse than you, someone starving in a war-torn nation, someone born into a situation that's robbed them of any shot at the kind of privileged life that you lead. And while empathy is vital, often this drive for it can lead to the marginalization of the negative experiences of others. It's this fact that influenced the decision to include this next section. While not necessarily in the same vein as our previous case studies, music surrounding the grieving of a relationship makes up a vast majority of the songs ever written. Indeed, when it comes to music about grief, there is none more ubiquitous than the breakup song. Besides, a palate cleanser from the heavy material we've covered so far will serve us well. It's semantics to decide what kind of breakup song qualifies as a song about grief, but I'd argue if any could be ubiquitously given that title, it'd be Divorce in the American South, written by Wonder Years frontman Dan Campbell and performed under his Aaron West side project. Unlike our previous entries, this one is fictional. Aaron West in the Roaring Twenties is an endeavor in storytelling rather than catharsis for its creator. Campbell is a happily married man who in recent years has welcomed multiple children with his wife. Aaron West is a broken soul, coming off a nasty divorce that came as the result of a miscarriage, and who now wanders aimlessly around the southern United States, trying to figure out just what went wrong to bring him to this state of disrepair. Divorce in the American South is written as an open letter to his ex-wife, spilling his guts in a way he never has previously, as he croons on the track's second verse.
Hey Diane, I know I fucked up. It's just when we lost the baby, I kinda shut off. And I know I never listened, I wasn't there for you enough. I'm a fuck up.
He grieves for his marriage, for their unborn child, but most of all, he grieves the life he thought he was going to lead. It's a theme Campbell's work has explored on a number of occasions throughout his time fronting the Wonder Years, especially as the group aged. Passing through a screen door from 2014's The Greatest Generation sees Campbell wrestling with the consequences of choosing a life on the road. Years of touring have taken its toll both on his body but also on his goals and dreams. The transient lifestyle has made the prospect of settling down and having a family impossible to fathom. The matter becoming all the more pressing as he sees family and past friends all getting the life he always dreamed he would have, or, at very least, was expected to have. The song's iconic bridge is a bombastic release, Campbell's frustration and anger boiling over into a roar.
Jesus Christ, I'm 26. All the people that brought you away. All the lies, all the people who care if they don't only die. Jesus Christ, did I fuck up?
He's looking for a way out, and as the years passed, he seems to have found one. After all, he's happily married with a couple of kids to come home to at night these days. But I can't help but feel like his work in Aaron West is at least partially a look into a world where he never found that tear in the screen door, and serves as a lens for Campbell to peer into the mirror and find out what life would have looked like if his fears had actually come to pass. These themes are often best explored by folk-tinged troubadours like Bogus. An underground songwriter from Tennessee, Bogus' potent mix of early adulthood malaise is paired almost exclusively with a single guitar track outlining the contours of the stories of heartbreak, depression, and hopelessness that paint a stark picture of small-town living. Transcendentalism is about the decaying of a connection and the residual effects on the people once tied together so tightly. Nothing will ever be the same, because it's impossible for either of them to be the same forever. The march of time erodes and reshapes the landscape of our personalities. Trauma tears asunder aspects of yourself others may have once lauded as defining characteristics, the crushing weight of expectation warping our attitudes and outer shell from smooth, glassy facades to a cracked, jagged armor we keep close to prevent the harm we've been running from, even though the protective qualities also serve to scare away those whose shells have yet to be penetrated. He grieves not only for his lost connection with his friend, but for the loss of their innocence that facilitated it. The suffering is palpable, but rather than the throbbing stab wounds that were a crow looked at me in stage 4, Bogus explores the aftermath. A still purple but yellowing bruise, the crusty scabbed over cut that can reopen at any time, but, for the moment, isn't seeping blood into the bandages. There's no sense of confusion in his reflection. He knows exactly how they got where they are. There's just nothing he can do about it. The cycle of life is undefeated, after all. I'm going to leave you with a song that's affected me deeply in recent weeks. Rich People is a project from Philadelphia who, in 2018, my band opened for. Their unique brand of emotive alt-rock was a huge influence on my writing in the years after this chance encounter, and the grace and openness they showed a couple of kids just getting their feet wet and being a band is something that has always stuck with me. Several months ago, they announced they were calling it quits. The pandemic claimed another victim. My band would follow a few weeks later. Their final record concludes with the song Moving Parts, an open letter from vocalist Rob Rich to his bandmates over the years, softly crooned over a single acoustic guitar, grieving the loss of their connection, but also celebrating the memories they were able to make together, any bitterness or anger having long since faded. It's a moving tribute to the loss of a companionship he clearly treasured, but one he has clearly made his peace with. That peace, the calmness and serenity in his acceptance gives me comfort that, someday, it is possible for grief to cease being a painful wound and to morph itself into a scar, one you run your finger over in solitary moments to remind yourself of where you've come from and what you've been through, of the people and connections you've lost, and of the living you've still got ahead of you.